So look, when I sat down to figure out which race in Elder Scrolls deserves the title of most evil, I had 3 real contenders on my list. The Dwemer, who literally enslaved the Falmer, their own cousins, and turned them into these blind, twisted cave creatures through feeding them poisonous fungi. The Slodes, these massive slug people from the island of Thras, who unleashed the Thracian plague that wiped out like half of Tamriel's population in the Second Era. And the Aelids, the Heartland High Elves who ruled Cyrodiil before humans took over. I went with the Aelids. And after you hear everything about these guys, their entire history, what they built, what they believed, and especially what they did to people, you'll understand why. The thing about the Aelids is, they're everywhere in Elder Scrolls, but most players barely know them. Every time you play Oblivion, you're walking through their ruins. That white gold tower dominating the Imperial City skyline, that's theirs. Those glowing wells scattered across Cyrodiil that restore your magicka, theirs too. The entire infrastructure of the Imperial Heartland, the layout of the land itself, was built on the bones of their civilization, but they've been gone for thousands of years. No living Aelids exist in any of the games. They're ghosts, legends, ruins, and trauma. So let's go through literally everything. Their origins, their culture, their magic, their cities, their religion, their atrocities, their fall, and what happened to the survivors. Because the Aelids are one of the most important civilizations in Elder Scrolls lore, and they deserve a complete examination. Starting from the very beginning, the Meretic era. This is thousands of years before any of the games you've played, back when recorded history barely existed. The term Merethic literally means era of the elves, because this was when elves dominated Tamriel. The Aelids didn't start as Aelids. They started as Aldmer, the ancient elves from the Somerset Isles. The Aldmer were the progenitor race of basically all elves in Tamriel. The word Aldmer translates to first folk or elder folk in their language. These elves had a rigid, hierarchical society on Somerset, with strict laws, traditions, and a really oppressive government under the High King of Alinor. During the Middle Merethic era, an explorer named Topal the Pilot started charting the mainland of Tamriel. His journeys are documented in a text called Father of the Niben, which is written as an epic poem. Topal sailed down what would become the Niben River, explored the coastlines, mapped out new lands. He found this super fertile area around the Niben Valley, and he allegedly purchased 8 islands from some native people called the Birdmen. These Birdmen are one of the mysteries of Elder Scrolls lore. The earliest Aldmeri account of the Heartlands mentions these friendly, feathered birdfolk who lived there, but then they just vanished from history. Some sources suggest the arriving Aldmer enslaved them. Others think they were driven out or killed. Either way, by the time the Aelids were established, the Birdmen were gone, just one of many races that got erased from Tamriel's history. So Topal's explorations opened the door, and the Aldmer back on Somerset started hearing about this incredible land on the mainland. Fertile soil, abundant resources, warm climate, and most importantly, it was far away from the strict control of Alinor. See, the High King of Alinor had a lot of regulations. Among many other things, he forbade Daedra worship. This was a big deal. The Aldmer traditionally worshipped the Aedra, the ancestor gods who gave up their divine essence to create the mortal world. Daedra worship was considered heretical, dangerous, immoral. But some Aldmer wanted the freedom to worship whatever they wanted. Others just wanted better opportunities. The Somerset hierarchy was intense, with even the lowest workers treated pretty poorly. The mainland represented freedom, possibility, a chance to build something new. So groups of Aldmer started leaving. They weren't the only ones. The Chimer left around the same time, following the Prophet Veloth to what would become Morrowind. Other groups went to various parts of Tamriel. The Aldmer, who went to the mainland, became all the different elven folk eventually, Kimmer, Bosmer, and Aelids among others. The ones who stayed in Somerset became the Altmer, obsessively preserving their pure Aldmeri bloodline and culture. The groups that went to the Heartlands called the region Cyrodiil, which means region at the heart in their language. They called themselves several things over time. At first, they were just Heartland Aldmer or Cyrodiil Aldmer, sometimes shortened to Silmer. They were also called Saliasha in their own tongue. Humans would later call them Wild Elves, though that's kind of a misnomer since they built the most advanced civilization in Tamriel at the time. But their real name, the one they gave themselves in secret, was Aelid. This translates to hidden ones in their language, Aelidun. They called themselves this because they were conspiring, building power in secret, making deals with Daedric princes, getting ready to break away from Somerset completely. The distance between Cyrodiil and the Somerset Isles gave them practical independence. Communication took forever. The colonies in the Heartlands were technically tribute lands to the High King of Alinor, supposed to send taxes and follow Aldmeri law, but enforcement was basically impossible due to geography. The Heartland Elves ruled their city-states as their own nations. They claimed themselves as kings. This autonomy made them crave actual, official independence. Their language evolved too. At first they spoke Silmeris, a regional dialect of Aldmeris, the ancient Aldmer language. But the separatists developed Aelidun, the hidden tongue, specifically to make it harder for their scheming to be discovered by the crown back in Alinor. Aelidun became their primary language, though it remained very similar to Aldmeris in structure and vocabulary. The Aelid plan came together in the late Merethic era. They built the White Gold Tower on the Citadel, a massive city of marble constructed on those 8 islands Topol had purchased centuries earlier. This wasn't just some building. The White Gold Tower was built in open emulation of the Adamantine Tower, which is the oldest known structure in Tamriel and one of the most metaphysically important locations in all of existence. See, towers in Elder Scrolls lore aren't just architecture, they're metaphysical anchors. They help hold reality together, maintain the stability of Mundus, the mortal plane. The Adamantine Tower was where convention happened, the event where the Aedra came together and established the rules of mortality and time after Lorkhan tricked them into creating Mundus. It's literally where linear time began. The Aelids understood this. They built White Gold Tower to tell its own story, inscribing rules into reality through Variorum architects, thereby shaping the nature of existence within its domain. The tower was meant to counteract the spiritual bleeding from Mundus since convention, serving as a reconnection point between the mortal world and the divine. To accomplish this, the Aelids made pacts with Daedric princes to harvest castaway Creatia from the void itself. The tower's stone, its metaphysical anchor, was the Kimmel Adabel, the Amulet of Kings. Legend says it was formed from a drop of blood that fell from the heart of Lorkhan as it sailed across Tamriel after being ripped from his chest. This drop of divine blood fell into an Aelid well, where the magical energy crystallized it. The Aelids then cut it into a diamond shape. Some sources suggest the Aelids themselves created the amulet, while others say they just found and shaped it. Either way, it became the Stone of White Gold Tower. With the tower complete, with enough magical power to rival Somerset's Crystal Tower, the Aelids had their moment. Around the same time, Epler Camoran declared himself King of Valenwood and broke away from Alinor. Emboldened by this, the Aelid kings arranged a great council of kings in the Citadel. There, they declared themselves the Aelid Empire and completely severed ties with the Aldmeri kingdom. The year was one Aelid era, what we'd call the end of the Merethic era, or the beginning of the First Era, depending on how you count it. The Aelids were independent, they were free, and the Aldmer back in Somerset couldn't really do anything about it. Now, let's talk about what made the Aelid civilization unique. Because these weren't just elves who broke away from their homeland. They became something different. Their magic, their culture, their entire worldview diverged from their Aldmer origins. First, their appearance. The Aelids looked similar to other Mer, but with distinct characteristics. They had pointed ears and angular facial features like all elves, thin and lean builds. But their skin tones were darker than the Golden Altmer, while lighter than the Ash-Grey Dunmer. They ranged from light tan to dark bronze, kind of similar to Bosmer coloring. Their eyes ranged from white to turquoise, with some sources mentioning bright yellows, oranges, blues, and purples. Their hair colors were more diverse than Aldmer hair, ranging from blondes to browns and occasionally blacks. Interestingly, there's some suggestion that the Daedric influence changed their appearance over generations. The Barsabic Aelids, those who kept worshipping the Aedra, supposedly looked closer to the Ealdmer. The Daedra-worshipping Aelids developed more varied traits. Average height was around 1.8 to 2.1 meters. Average lifespan was 300 years, pretty standard for elves. Their magic was insane. The Aelids preserved Dawn-era magic, the oldest forms, the kind of runes and spells that other elves had forgotten or abandoned. They kept the language of the Elnofey, the Earthbones, the original spirits that became the laws of nature. This gave them access to reality-altering magic that even the Altmer of their time didn't have. The Aelids are credited with founding the entire school of alteration magic. Shape-shifting, levitation, transmutation, all of it came from their research. They could alter landscapes, turn barren soil into lush forests, just through magical will. In Rivenspire, they transformed the area around the Doomcrag from a wasteland into a thriving garden. There's theories that Cyrodiil itself was shaped by Aelid magic, that the subtropical jungle climate of Old Cyrodiil was maintained by enchantments centered in White Gold Tower. When the Aelids fell and the tower changed hands, the climate shifted to temperate forests. Their elemental philosophy was unique. Where most cultures recognize 4 elements as earth, water, air, and fire, the Aelids had earth, water, air, and light. They believed fire was just a weak, corrupt form of light associated with base magical principles. Light was the pure element, the source of magic itself. This makes sense when you understand their cosmology. In Elder Scrolls lore, stars aren't balls of gas. They're holes to Aetherius, the plane of magic, punched through the sky when the Magnage fled Mundus during creation. Magnus, the architect of Mundus, tore the biggest hole when he left, creating the sun. Starlight is literally magic streaming into the mortal world from Aetherius. The Aelids revered starlight as the most sublime form of light because it was the most potent and exalted magical power, coming directly from Aetherius. This became the foundation of their entire magical system. They built Aelid wells all across Cyrodiil. You see these in Oblivion, weathered stone structures with these cool visual effects. Each well harvested and stored starlight somehow, magical power drawn directly from Aetherius. Anyone with even basic magical talent could use them to restore their magicka. They recharged at midnight when starlight was strongest. The Aelids designed them so even non-mages could benefit from their power. The wells are scattered seemingly randomly across the landscape. None are associated with specific settlements. The logic behind their placement is a mystery that scholars still debate thousands of years later. Some think it's geographical, following ley lines or power nodes. Others think it's astronomical, aligned with constellations. Nobody knows for sure. When fragments of Aetherius fell to Tamriel as shooting stars, they land as meteoric iron or meteoric glass. The Aelids used these materials to craft their most powerful artifacts. Meteoric iron was used for weapons and armor, but also for religious statues. Meteoric glass was even more valuable. They created Welkin stones from meteoric glass, these glowing blue-white crystals that could restore your magicka instantly. The name literally means sky children in their language. Each stone was a perfect storage container for magical energy drawn from starlight. In Oblivion, you can still find these in Aelid ruins thousands of years after the civilization fell. Varla stones were even rarer. These starstones could recharge every enchanted item you owned at once, restoring all their magical charges simultaneously. Making these stones required incredible skill and understanding of ethereal magic. Modern mages can't replicate the process. Any attempt to study existing stones results in them turning to dust. Inside Aelid cities, at the very heart of each settlement, they placed great Welkin stones. These were massive crystals, large pieces of enchanted meteoric glass that powered entire cities. Climate control, lighting, defensive systems, everything ran off these enormous magical batteries. The stones would gradually get stolen over time due to their immense value, which is why only a few remained by the Third Era. The Eyelids also created magical pillars that would respond to shock magic spells. If you cast lightning at them while carrying a Welkin stone, they'd grant you powerful new spells. They built spheres of powerful shock magic in Valenwood, becoming the first Storm Wardens. They could bind Daedra to specific locations using Welkin stone magic. Their cities were architectural marvels, built from this pale white limestone that seemed to glow from within, even without external light sources. The stone was practically indestructible. Thousands of years after the Eyelids disappeared, their ruins still stand with the white stone intact. Some scholars think the glow wasn't just reflected light, but actual magical luminescence embedded in the material. Their architecture showed clear Altmer influence because both cultures descended from the Altmer, but the Eyelids developed their own distinct style. Soaring columns, intricate carvings, the Blessed Life Tree symbol on doors, statues of Auriel and other Aedra throughout their buildings. Cities ranged from small settlements to massive metropolises with multiple levels. The largest cities had sophisticated infrastructure, plumbing systems, climate control powered by great Welkin stones, magical illumination that didn't rely on fire. They used lamps, globes, pools, and fountains of pure magic to light their halls. The light in Eyelid ruins even now doesn't come from combustion. It comes from residual magical energy still trapped in the stone after thousands of years. Each city-state was independent. The Eyelid Empire wasn't really a unified empire in the traditional sense. It was more like an alliance of independent kingdoms that happened to share culture and language. Each city had its own king who answered to nobody. The only central authority was this council of princes in White Gold Tower, made up of heirs to various kingdoms. They had a high chancellor who was supposed to mediate disputes, but the position had basically no real power. The city-states competed constantly for influence, territory, and resources. This decentralization would eventually contribute to their downfall, but during their height it allowed for incredible diversity in how different kingdoms operated. Now we need to talk about their religion, because this is where things get complicated and dark. Originally, the Eyelids followed a modified version of the Aldmeri pantheon. The traditional Aedric deities of the Aldmer evolved into what the Eyelids called the Ten Ancestors. These were Auriel, Trinimac, Magnus, Sirabane, Ifre, Xarxes, Mara, Stendar, Lorcan, and Finester. Notice something? Stendar and Lorcan are in there. To the Aldmer, these were enemy gods. Lorcan especially was considered evil, the Doomdrum, the one who tricked the Aedra into creating Mundus and thereby losing their divinity, but the Eyelids included them. This was considered heretical by Somerset standards and led to persecution, which pushed more of these cultists to flee to the Heartlands. The Eyelids housed statues of the 10 ancestors in White Gold Tower in what they called the Temple of the Ancestors. These weren't normal statues. They were made mostly of meteoric iron prongs with shards of meteoric glass at their centers. They played a huge role in Eyelid religion and culture. The ancestors themselves were believed to worship the Daedra, or at least that's what the Daedra-worshipping Eyelids claimed. Auriel held a central position in early Eyelid worship. Statues throughout Cyrodiil depicted an eagle lifting a figure carrying a bow and shield from ensnaring ground, symbolizing Auriel's role as savior and guide. He was the father of their race, the king of the Aldmer, the one who led them through the Dawn era. Magnus, the god of sight, light, and insight, received particular reverence because the Eyelids saw him as the source of magical power. Magnus designed Mundus, the mortal world. When he realized what Lorcan had tricked them into, Magnus tore open the sky to escape back to Aetherius, leaving behind the sun as the greatest source of light and magic. The followers of the traditional faith became known as the Barsabic Eyelids. These were the conservatives who maintained ancestor worship and honored the Aedra. They built temples like Gloriosel in Black Marsh in veneration of the ancestors. They treated their subjects relatively humanely compared to what was coming. But in the last millennium of the Merethic era, everything changed. Daedra worship started spreading through Eyelid society like wildfire. What began as fringe cults became mainstream religion. Cults devoted to various Daedric princes sprang up across Cyrodiil. At first, they were merely tolerated. Then, they were celebrated. Here's the thing that made the Eyelids different from other Daedra worshipping cultures. The Chimer who left Somerset around the same time, they worshipped Daedra too. But they made distinctions between good and bad Daedra. They followed Azura, Boethia, and Mephala as the Reclamations, the good Daedra. They opposed the House of Troubles, the bad Daedra like Molag-Bal and Mehrunes as Dagon. The Eyelids made no such distinctions. All Daedric princes were potential sources of power and knowledge. Meridia, the Prince of Life and Light, absolutely, she was super popular, seen as the personification of their sacred element. But they'd worship Molag-Bal, the King of Rape, just as readily. Or Mehrunes Dagon, the Prince of Destruction. Or Hermaius Mora, the Gardener of Men. Whoever offered advantages worth pursuing. Different cities favored different princes. Meridia was popular across many kingdoms because she aligned with their light philosophy. The city of Garlas Malatar was built specifically for her by King Naril Mor, who gave up his will to become one of her purified. Delodil, later known as the Hollow City, worshipped Meridia and called her Merid Nunda. But the darker princess had plenty of followers too. Molag-Bal, who embodies domination and enslavement, was worshipped in Abagarlas. Sanguin, the prince of debauchery and hedonistic indulgence, inspired the worst practices. Ancient manuscripts describe Sanguin, whom the Eyelids called blood-made pleasure, personally overseeing Eyelid artists as they perfected their torture techniques. One text mentions an Eyelid named Eldhal, the Inducer, creating something called the Messenger Beast redeemed under Sanguin's guidance. Hermaius Mora gained followers in the city of Bisnansel. High Priest Uluskund established a congregation that attracted learned and influential people. When King Laloria Randinar refused to give them more political power, they deposed him within months. The cult turned Bisnansel into a shrine storing forbidden knowledge that could manipulate the natural order of reality. Mehrunes Dagon, Hermaius Mora, and other princes had dedicated temples and followers. The Eyelids worshipped whoever offered power, without moral consideration for what that prince represented. This created a massive schism in Eyelid society. The Barsabic Eyelids who kept the old ways versus the Daedra-worshipping Eyelids who became known as the Narfinsel Eyelids or Daedrophiles. The tension kept building for centuries. Kings who embraced Daedra worship gained significant advantages. Magical power from their patron princes. Daedric armies to call upon. Knowledge and artifacts that gave them edges over their rivals. This created pressure on other kingdoms to follow suit or risk being conquered. The conflict finally exploded in what's called the Narfinsel Schism, a civil war that lasted from the late Merethic era all the way to year 198 of the First Era. Centuries of warfare between Aedra worshippers and Daedra worshippers. The war peaked at the scouring of Wendelbeck in year 198. King Glinfern of Atatar, leading the Daedra-worshipping kingdoms, gathered a Daedric army and attacked the Barsabic stronghold of Wendelbeck. The Barsabics got driven out of the Heartlands completely. They fled to Black Marsh, northern Argonia, and established settlements there. After the scouring of Wendelbeck, Daedra worship was the dominant force in Cyrodiil. The organized opposition was gone. The Eyelids had basically guaranteed their own destruction by weakening themselves with internal conflict just decades before everything would collapse. Now, we get to the part that really earns the Eyelids their reputation. The slavery, the torture, the systematic brutality that turned them into monsters in human folklore for thousands of years. When human tribes started migrating to Tamriel from Atmora, coming down through Skyrim into Cyrodiil, the Eyelids enslaved them. At first, it was occasional, opportunistic. Then it became systematic. An entire institution, the backbone of their economy and society. These weren't just any humans. They were the Nedes, various tribes with different names and cultures. The historical text called the Adabul-A lists some of them: Kothri, Nede, Alhemha, men of Crete, imported from the north, probably from Skyrim, Keptu, men of Ge, Alhard, men of Ket, and others. Each tribe had its own identity, culture, and history. But to the Aelids, these distinctions were irrelevant. The text says explicitly that the human slaves knew no freedom, even to keep family or choice of name, except in secret. Think about that. They couldn't keep their families together. They couldn't even use their own names openly. They were organized into work gangs, barely seen as people. Slaves did everything: agriculture, lifting stones, draining fields, upkeep of temples and roads, construction of the great cities and infrastructure. Every aspect of the Aelid economy relied on forced labor. But here's where the Aelids become uniquely evil. They didn't just use slaves for work. They tortured them for entertainment, for religious purposes. As an art form, they called it art torture. Different cities specialized in different methods. Let me walk you through what we know. Vindazil had the wailing wheels. Legend speaks of flesh sculptures created through this art torture, where the Aelids derived strange pleasure by subjecting Nedic slaves to it. We don't know exactly what the wailing wheels were, but based on the name and the context, you can imagine something that made people scream while their bodies were transformed into sculptures. Circen had gut gardens, creating grotesque gardens from the entrails of living slaves, taking their internal organs and arranging them into some kind of display while keeping the victims alive. Flesh sculpture existed everywhere among the Daedra-worshipping Aelids. This was the practice of magically reshaping living bodies, cutting people open, rearranging their organs, manipulating their bones and skin into twisted art pieces while they were still conscious and aware. The Barsabic Aelids who fled to Black Marsh brought this practice with them, enslaving local Argonians specifically for the color and texture of their skin. The worst was in the realm of Fire King Hadul of Seatar. His specialty was forcing slaves to inhale hallucinogenic drugs derived from Daedric magic that made them feel like they were burning from the inside out. Imagine that. Not actually burning, but experiencing the sensation constantly through chemical torture. And then, for nighttime entertainment, for what they called tiger sport, Hadhul would set children on fire to use them as living torches while hunting, actually setting children on fire to light the hunt. This wasn't fringe behavior. This wasn't hidden away. The kingdoms that worshipped the most malevolent Daedric princes openly celebrated these practices. Sanguine personally encouraged and guided the development of new torture techniques. Molag Bal, whose sphere is literally domination and enslavement, had entire cities devoted to him where this brutality was religious practice. Not every Aelid kingdom did this. The Barsabic Aelids who worshipped the Aedra treated their subjects more humanely. Even among Daedra worshippers, there were variations. Some kingdoms focused on magical research or territorial conquest rather than torture. But enough Aelids engaged in these practices that Aelid became synonymous with monstrous cruelty. For thousands of years after their fall, human cultures told stories about the Aelids as ultimate monsters. Parents would scare children with tales of what the elves had done, and the stories weren't exaggerated. If anything, they were sanitized. The Aelids took the miracle of their magical advancement, their architectural genius, their preservation of ancient knowledge, and built it all on a foundation of suffering. Not just slavery, which existed in many cultures throughout history, but torture as entertainment, as religious practice, as aesthetic expression. They saw beauty in agony. This brings us to the Alessian slave rebellion, the event that would topple the Aelid Empire and change Tamriel forever. Around year 242 of the First Era, a Nedic slave woman had visions. Her original name is lost, but she's known as Alessia, Saint Alessia, the slave queen. Different sources call her by different names. Perif in some texts, Alesh in others. She grew up in Sard, later known as Sardavar Lied, where the Ailids herded in slaves from across all Daneben. She prayed to Akatosh, the dragon god of time, begging for help to free her people from the Aelid masters. And according to legend, the gods answered. She received 3 visions at Sankretor, a sacred site. The 3rd vision was Pelinal Whitestrake. Pelinal is described as emerging into Nirn like a padomaic carried by Cetis and all the forces of change. He was an Ada, a spirit, possibly an avatar of Shezar or Lorcan himself. Some think he was a Shezarene, one of many avatars sent by the missing god to champion humanity. Others think he was something else entirely. His name means Star-Made Knight in the Elven language, which is weird because he hated elves with an absolutely psychotic passion. He had snow-white hair, which is where Whitestrake comes from. Under his armor, where his heart should be, there was this red, rage-filled crystal that sang like a dragon. His left hand was described as being made of killing light, some kind of magical weapon fused to his body. He wore armor that Pelinal himself admitted was unlike any crafted by men and would say no more even when pressed. The Song of Pelinal, the primary historical text about him, mentions that the armor came from the future. The 8 divines gave him equipment that wouldn't exist yet in his time period, couldn't be damaged by contemporary weapons, and couldn't be replicated by mortal smiths. Pelinal was also completely insane. He had these episodes called madnesses, where he'd lose control and just destroy everything around him. During these fits of rage, entire regions would be devoured in divine rampage to become void. Not just destroyed, erased, turned into nothing. Made it so those places never existed. When someone named Garid of the Men of Ge once asked Pelinal what the madness felt like, Pelinal could only answer, like when the dream no longer needs its dreamer. That's a really unsettling answer when you think about it. It suggests Pelinal was aware he was some kind of construct, a tool, something that existed for a purpose rather than its own sake. Alessia gathered an army. She had Pelinal Whitestrake, this divine warrior of pure rage. She had Morihaus, her lover, a demigod who was half man and half bull, could fly, and was apparently also an Ada or spirit, and she had something the Aelids didn't expect. Some of the Aelid kingdoms joined the rebellion. The ones still worshipping the Aedra, they hated their Daedra-worshipping cousins enough to side with the human slaves. Cities like these became allies, providing magical knowledge, resources, and legitimacy to the uprising. Plus, the Nords came down from Skyrim to help. They saw Pelinal standing at the bridge of Helden after so much battle that his white hair had become stained brown with blood, and they thought sure their missing god had returned. Pelinal was furious at this comparison and literally spat at their feet for what he saw as profaning that name, but they still followed him. The rebellion tore through Cyrodiil. In 1 year, Pelinal claimed all the eastern lands. He freed the slaves of Vahtasan. He liberated the 1,000 strong of Sedor, a whole human tribe that had been enslaved there. Nothing could stop his march. Pelinal's tactic was simple but effective. He'd challenge Aelid kings to single combat, just walk up and duel them one-on-one, and he'd slaughter them. Then he'd raze their cities. He killed King Hadul, the Fire King, on the granite steps of Seyatar. The texts say Hadul's spears knew their first refute because for a time no weapon of the Aelids could pierce Pelinal's future armor. He smashed Godhor the Shaper's head on the goat-faced altar of Ninendava. Then, in his wisdom, Pelinal set a small plague spell to keep Gordhar's spirit from reforming through welkin magic. He understood Aelid magic well enough to counter their resurrection techniques. He killed multiple eastern chieftains and came back to Alessia's camp holding a sword and mace, both encrusted with the smashed viscera of elven faces. Feathers and magic beads, the traditional markings of Aelid nobility, stuck to the blood on his weapons. He lifted them and said these were their eastern chieftains, no longer full of their talking. But then something happened that sent Pelinal into his first madness. A man named Huna died. Pelinal had raised Huna from grain slave to hoplite, trained him personally, and loved him deeply. Huna was killed by an arrow made from the beak of an eyelid named Selethalel the Singer. Pelinal went absolutely berserk. He wrought destruction from Narlame all the way to Celidil and erased those lands from the maps of elves and men. Everything in them gone, wiped from existence. The gods themselves were so disgusted they threatened to leave the earth, and Alessia had to make sacrifices to convince them to stay and give Pelinal succor, so he no longer had the will to kill the earth in whole. The Aelids were desperate. They made a pact with Meridia, getting her Auroran soldiers as defenders. These Aurorans are basically Daedric angels, warriors of light devoted to Meridia. The Aelids appointed a champion to face Pelinal, Umaril the Unfeathered, half-elf, half-divine. His father was an Ada, giving Umaril the blood of spirits. He had wings initially, golden armor, incredible power. Meridia granted him a form of immortality. When his body died, his soul would go to her realm, the Colored Rooms, where he could eventually reform and return. Umaril challenged Pelinal to a duel at White Gold Tower. The Alessian War Council was terrified. Even with all their victories, facing Umaril at the tower itself seemed impossible. They recommended Alessia wait for reinforcements. The council gave strategic reasons for delay. This made Pelinal furious. He called them cowards, accused them of lacking faith. Then he just went to White Gold alone to face Umaril and the entire Allied defense. Umaril wasn't stupid. He sent wave after wave of soldiers to weaken Pelinal first before engaging him personally. Aurorans, Daedra, Storm Atronachs, cohorts of Aelid warriors. They managed to wound Pelinal, pierce his supposedly impenetrable armor, make him bleed, but Pelinal killed them all and kept advancing through the tower. When Umaril finally came down from his throne to fight, both combatants were already injured and exhausted. The duel was brutal. Pelinal broke off Umaril's wings, which is where the unfeathered title came from. He dented Umaril's golden helmet so badly it made Pelinal laugh. The texts say Pelinal's laughter during combat was terrifying. Pelinal beat Umaril, defeated the Aelid champion in single combat, but Pelinal, wounded and in his rage exhaustion, made a terrible mistake. He started mocking Umaril's ancestry. He insulted the bloodline of all elves, calling back to Adamantia and the original sins of the Aldmer. The other Aelid kings watching the duel lost it. They broke the sacred rules of single combat and attacked Pelino altogether, multiple sorcerer kings working in unison. They cut him into 8 pieces. The Aelids were obsessed with the number 8 for reasons scholars still debate. It shows up constantly in their culture, their architecture, their symbolism. 8 islands in the original citadel purchase, 8 pieces of Pelinal. Cutting him into 8 pieces was their ultimate insult, their way of claiming symbolic victory even in defeat. Morihaus, Pelinal's friend and Alessia's lover, tried to reach him. The texts describe Morihaus bashing White Gold Tower with his horns, trying to break in, but he was too late. He found only Pelinal's severed head. And here's where it gets weird. The head was still alive, still talking. They had this final conversation. Pelinal spoke about regret, about truths that even Alessia would never know, about the nature of his existence. He told Morihaus that he'd been the enemy of all Mer, not just the Aelids, and that his hatred was broader than their cause justified. Then Pelinal, with his dying magic, realized something. Umaril's soul had escaped. His body was destroyed, but thanks to Meridia's gift, Umaril would return eventually. Pelinal warned Morihaus about this, told him to pass the message on. Then he finally died for real. The next morning, most of the Aelid kings who'd killed Pelinal were found dead. Pelinal had apparently killed them all in the night, even while dying himself, before finally succumbing. It was year 243 of the First Era. The White Gold Tower fell. The Aelid Empire was broken, but this wasn't the end of the Aelids themselves. Alessia was smart. She didn't immediately try to exterminate every Aelid. The ones who'd helped her rebellion, the Barsabic Aelids who still worshipped the Aedra, she let them stay as vassals. They kept their territories and ruling structures in exchange for loyalty to the new Alessian Empire. She even incorporated their gods into her new religion. The 8 divines were a deliberate blend of Nordic and Elven deities. Akatosh was Auriel. Dibella had Elven aspects. This religious synthesis was partially political, keeping Aelid nobles happy, but it also made sense. Many of the human slaves had adopted Aedra worship from their Aelid masters during captivity. Some Aelid kingdoms even prospered under human rule. King Laloriaran, Dinar of Nenalata, whose name literally means king in dark times in Aelidun, was granted land by Alessia herself. He founded the city of Biznansil. His kingdom enjoyed relative peace and autonomy. For a couple hundred years, this arrangement held. Aelid vassal kingdoms existed throughout Cyrodiil under human rule. They paid tribute, they followed Alessian law, but they kept their culture and identity. Some Aelids became integrated into human society, intermarrying, serving as advisors and mages. But resentment kept building on both sides. Humans remembered the torture and slavery. They told stories to their children about what the Aelids had done. Each generation heard about the wailing wheels, the gut gardens, the children burning as torches. The trauma ran deep. And some humans wanted revenge. Others wanted the wealth and land the Aelids still controlled. Greed and hatred mixed together. Around the year 246, just 3 years after the fall of White Gold, a prophet named Maruch appeared. He was a former Nedic slave who'd experienced the worst of Aelid brutality. He founded the Alessian Order, a religious movement that would eventually transform the empire. Maruch's teachings were complicated. He preached human supremacy, yes, but also monotheism. He argued that all the divines were aspects of a single god. This was heretical to the polytheistic religions of both Nords and Aelids, but it resonated with humans who wanted a distinct identity separate from Elven influence. The Alessian Order grew slowly at first. By year 266, they controlled enough of the empire to pass the first Alessian doctrines. These laws started limiting Aelid rights and autonomy. Heavier taxes, restrictions on where they could live and what they could own. By year 361, the Alessian Order had complete control of the empire. They passed new doctrines abolishing all remaining Aelid lordships. Every Aelid noble lost their titles and lands. The vassal kingdoms were dissolved. This triggered the Aelid diaspora, the Great Scattering. Refugee populations fled Cyrodiil in every direction, trying to find somewhere safe to preserve their culture and survive. The ones who went north into Skyrim were slaughtered. King Vrage, the Butcher, led the Nordic extermination personally. The Nords had helped in the rebellion, sure, but they'd never forgotten that Pelennor had spurned them. And Nords already hated elves. They hunted down the Aelid refugees systematically, just massacred them. Some groups tried to return to Black Marsh. The Adatarics, refugees from the city of Adatar, attempted to join the Barsabic Aelids, who'd fled there during the scouring of Wendelbeck a century earlier. But the Barsabics refused them. These were the same Daedra-worshipping kingdoms that had driven them out of the Heartlands. The old religious war was still fresh. So the Adatarics went to elsewhere instead. Most of them died there. There's a reference to them launching some failed expedition that wiped out most of their population. The survivors scattered, lost to history. Other groups made it to High Rock. They had to march through Hammerfell and around the Iliac Bay, a dangerous journey through hostile territory. But some clans reached the island of Balfiera. There they joined with the Direni, another old elven clan that had been in High Rock since the Meretic era. The Aelids got absorbed into the Direni population. They brought their magical knowledge, their architectural techniques, their culture. Some scholars think this influx of Aelid refugees is what gave the Direni hegemony enough strength to later defeat the Alessian Empire in the War of Righteousness. If that's true, the Aelids got their revenge through the Direni. But the biggest refugee group fled to Valenwood. The Bosmer, the Wood Elves, had their own complicated relationship with the Aelids. Some Aelid kingdoms had tried to conquer parts of Valenwood during the Empire's height. but the Bosmer agreed to take in the refugees on one strict condition. The Aelids had to follow the Green Pact. This sacred covenant forbids harming the forest of Valenwood. No cutting trees, no eating plant matter, no damaging the forest in any way. The Bosmer are strict carnivores because of this pact. They eat only meat, including the bodies of their enemies. The Aelids agreed. They didn't have much choice. They established settlements throughout Valenwood. For a while, they maintained their distinct culture and identity. Aelid architecture appeared in the forests. Their language was spoken. Their traditions continued. But the Green Pact killed them slowly. The Aelids relied on agriculture, on working the land, on transforming landscapes with magic. In Valenwood, they couldn't do any of that. They had to adapt to a completely different way of life. Within 2,000 years, every Aelid settlement in Valenwood was abandoned. The ruins still exist. You can find them in Elder Scrolls Online, but the people, gone. They'd integrated with the Bosmer, intermarried, and eventually just became Bosmer. Their distinct culture melted away. There's this theory called the Theorem of Disheritage. It suggests that over generations, the Valenwood Aelids became unable to breed with each other and could only have children with Bosmer partners. If true, this would explain their disappearance. Each generation had more Bosmer blood and less Aelid. Eventually, there was nothing left but Bosmer with some Aelid ancestry. The theory is based on old stories and incomplete records. Can't prove it, but something caused the Aelids to vanish from Valenwood completely. King Lalori Diner, the last Aelid king, had his own tragedy. Around year 372, he got an ultimatum from the Alessian emperor. Leave or face the Aelid pogrom, which was active persecution and extermination of all remaining Aelids in Cyrodiil. Dinar and his people abandoned their city of Nenalata and fled to High Rock. They founded Bisnancel, trying to maintain Aelid culture in exile, but it didn't last long. A cult of Hermaeus Mora worshippers within the city staged a coup and deposed Dinar. Then they made a deal with Molag Bal. The entire city, which they called Delodil or the Hollow City, got pulled into Cold Harbor. The whole thing, buildings, people, everything, ripped from Nirn and dragged into Molag Bal's realm of oblivion. Dinar was trapped there for centuries. Alone in Cold Harbor, with his people enslaved or transformed into soul-shriven, these hollow shells of their former selves. He watched his civilization die in the worst way possible. During the Second Era, during the events of Elder Scrolls Online, Molag Bal tried to merge Cold Harbor with Nirn in an event called the Planimeld. This would have destroyed the mortal world and turned it into an extension of his realm. The Vestige, that's your character in ESO, leads an invasion of Cold Harbor to stop this. They find the Hollow City and free Dinar. This ancient Aelid king, trapped for centuries, becomes the leader of the mortal forces. He commands the Fighters Guild warriors, strategizes the assault, and fights alongside you. But he dies in the final battle, mortally wounded while closing a Daedric portal to protect the Hollow City. He gives this speech about how he's the last of his kind, how his people are gone, but at least he got to help save Tamriel one final time. His spirit went to Aetherius, according to the lore. Finally at peace, after centuries of suffering. That should have been it. The last Aelid, dead. The civilization completely extinct. But there was one more. Umaril the Unfeathered. Remember, Pelinal had warned that Umaril's soul escaped to Meridia's realm, and in the Third Era, during the events of Oblivion's Knights of the Nine expansion, Umaril returns. His body reforms in what the texts call the Fires of Oblivion. Meridia brings him back. He wants revenge on the Divines who helped destroy his people 2,000 years earlier. He starts systematically attacking the chapels of the Nine Divines across Cyrodiil, desecrating them with his Auroran soldiers. A prophet appears and tells the hero of Kuwatch about this threat. The ghost of Pelinal Whitestrake shows up, guiding the hero to find the Crusaders' relics. These are the original armor and weapons from the Alessian Rebellion, blessed by the Divines, incredibly powerful. The hero becomes the new Divine Crusader. They hunt down Umaril and fight him at Garlas Malatar, the ruined Aelid city that had been built for Meridia. But here's the trick. To truly kill Umaril, you have to defeat him twice. Once in the physical world, which sends his soul fleeing to the colored rooms. Then you have to follow his soul there and destroy it in Meridia's realm. With the blessing of Talos and Pelinal's equipment, the hero of Kuwaj does it. Umaril is destroyed, both body and soul. The last remnant of the Aelids, completely gone. And that's it, the end of an entire civilization. No living Aelids exist in any of the games set after that. They're extinct, wiped from Tamriel. But their legacy is everywhere, and their influence shaped the entire continent. The geography of Cyrodiil was literally molded by them. Their serious theories that the climate of the region was maintained by Aelid magic centered in White Gold Tower. Old texts describe Cyrodiil as a subtropical jungle, humid, dense vegetation, completely different from what you see in Oblivion. When the Aelids fell and the tower changed hands, the magic failed. The climate shifted over the following centuries to temperate forests and grasslands. The entire ecosystem transformed because the magical infrastructure collapsed. Their language, Aelidun, influenced what became modern Cyrodiilic. Tons of place names across Cyrodiil are Aelid words: Bravil, Shadenhall, even Cyrodiil itself. The language was based on Aldmeris, but evolved into something distinct. The Aelids had initially used it as a secret code, so the authorities back in Somerset couldn't understand their conspiring. Some Aelidun phrases that survived give insight into their philosophy. Avlatta Magica, Avmolag Anyamis, translates to from light, magic, from fire, life. That's their whole elemental philosophy. Light is the source of magic. Fire, the corrupted form of light, is still the source of life and energy. Vagarlas Agia, Gravia Yegoria, Latia Malari of Malatu, means in the caverns of lore, ugly and obscure shines the gold of truth. This shows their attitude toward forbidden knowledge. They'd pursue anything, no matter how dark or dangerous, if it led to truth and power. No moral boundaries on research. Agia Haeliane Horane Merolaloria translates to, the stars are our eyes, the earth is our heart, connecting their reverence for starlight to their connection to the land. The stars provided magic and wisdom. The earth provided life and stability. Their architectural legacy is impossible to miss. Every Aelid ruin in Cyrodiil is a testament to their engineering genius. That white limestone is practically indestructible. Thousands of years of weather, warfare, looting, and general decay, and the structures still stand. The magical systems mostly failed, but some Welkin stones still work in the 4th era. Varla stones are incredibly rare by that point, but you can still find them occasionally. The ruins themselves are dangerous, filled with Daedra attracted to the residual magical power, undead raised by necromancers using the ancient sites, bandits who set up camps in the sturdy buildings. Adventurers and treasure hunters constantly pick through them looking for artifacts, and there's still stuff to find. Enchanted weapons using techniques modern smiths can't replicate, ancient texts describing lost magic. Aelid statues and religious artifacts that fetch huge prices from collectors. The ruins have been looted for thousands of years and they still hold treasures. White Gold Tower itself became the center of human civilization. The Alessian Empire made it their capital. Every subsequent empire that controlled Cyrodiil ruled from white gold. The Temple of the Ten Ancestors became the Imperial Palace. The same halls where Aelid sorcerer kings practiced their art torture now house the Emperor of Tamriel. There's something darkly poetic about that. The symbol of Aelid power and cruelty repurposed as the heart of human civilization. The same tower built to challenge the gods now serves human emperors. Every time an emperor sits on the throne in white gold, they're sitting in a building constructed by the very people humans fought so hard to destroy. The Amulet of Kings, the Kimel Adabal that served as the tower stone, became the symbol of legitimate rule over Cyrodiil. Every emperor wore it. When Martin Septim shattered it to stop Mehrunes Dagon's invasion in Oblivion, he broke something the Eyelids had created, the final piece of their original empire destroyed to save the world. In terms of magical advancement, the Eyelids have never been matched. Their understanding of starlight magic, their ability to harvest and store ethereal energy, their mastery of alteration to the point of reshaping landscapes, none of this has been replicated. Modern mages study Aelid texts, trying to recreate their techniques. The College of Winterhold has Aelid manuscripts in their archives. The Mages Guild spent centuries researching Aelid ruins. But so much knowledge was lost when the civilization fell. When the Aelids died, they took secrets with them: how to create Varla stones, how to build structures from that indestructible white limestone, how to craft great Welkin stones that could power entire cities, how to bind Daedra to physical locations. All gone. Their obsession with the number 8 is still a mystery. It shows up constantly. 8 islands in the original Citadel purchase. They cut Pellinal into 8 pieces. 8 pieces in traditional Aelid architecture patterns. 8 pointed stars in their religious symbolism. 8 notes in their musical scales based on Aelid instruments found in ruins. Scholars have theories. 8 might relate to the 8 divines, though that religion came after the Aelids fell. 8 might connect to the 8 planets visible from Nirn, each associated with an Aedric plane. 8 might be tied to some numerological principle in their magic. Nobody knows for sure. Their contribution to magical theory was massive. The school of alteration as we know it came from Aelid research. Conjuration techniques for binding Daedra drew on their methods. Even destruction magic owes something to their understanding of elemental forces, particularly their replacement of fire with light as a pure element. The Aelid wells are still used in the 4th era. Adventurers seek them out specifically to restore magicka. The fact that they still function after thousands of years with no maintenance shows how sophisticated the enchantments were. These weren't temporary spells. They were permanent alterations to reality anchored in the stone itself. In terms of historical impact, the Aelids shaped human-elf relations for millennia. Before them, there were examples of humans and elves coexisting relatively peacefully. After the Aelids, humans tell their children horror stories about elves for thousands of years. The deep-seated hatred and mistrust between humans and Mer throughout Elder Scrolls history has roots in what the Aelids did. The Alessian Order's human supremacy ideology, the hatred of elves in Skyrim that persists into the 4th era, the general suspicion humans have of magic and magical beings, the imperial tendency to see elves as potential threats, all of it traces back to the Aelid period. The Aelids didn't just torture their slaves, they traumatized human civilization across Tamriel. Generation after generation inherited the collective memory of what happened. The stories got passed down. The fear and hatred became cultural bedrock. This had consequences. When the Talmor rose to power in the 4th era and started pushing Altmer supremacy, humans had a ready-made narrative to oppose them. Remember what happened last time elves had too much power. Remember the Aelids. The historical trauma made it easier to mobilize human resistance against elven authority. The Alessian Empire itself was shaped by opposition to the Aelids. Maruch's teachings emphasized human distinctness, human superiority, the need to purge elven influence from religion and culture. This led to the Alessian doctrines, which banned elven faiths, persecuted anyone with elven ancestry, and tried to erase elven contributions from history. Ironically, this made the Alessian Empire almost as tyrannical as the Aelids had been. The Alessian Order became oppressive zealots who enforced their ideology through violence. They launched the Alessian Pogrom to hunt down remaining Aelids. They waged the War of Righteousness against the Dirini hegemony and lost badly. So, the Aelids created the conditions for their own destruction, but their destruction created the Alessian Order, which in turn created conditions for their own eventual collapse. Cycles of violence begetting violence, tyranny breeding resistance, which breeds new tyranny. Let's talk about specific Aelid cities and what made each unique, because the decentralized nature of their empire meant every city had its own character. White Gold Tower and the citadel was obviously the most important, built on 8 islands in the Niben. The tower itself was constructed to echo the Adamantine Tower. Multiple levels, sophisticated magical systems, the Temple of the Ancestors at its heart. This was the closest thing the Aelids had to a capital, though each city-state was independent. Nenalata, meaning Land of the Last One in Aeliidun, was ruled by King Laluriaran Dinar, one of the last Aelid cities to maintain independence under Alessian rule. Eventually abandoned when Dinar fled to High Rock, the ruins still exist in Cyrodiil. Bisnansel, founded by Dinar in High Rock, later got pulled into Cold Harbor. Before the coup, it was a center of learning. After the Hermaeus Mora cult took over, it became a repository of forbidden knowledge. The Hollow City in Iso is Bisnansel transformed. Garlas Malatar was built specifically for Meridia by King Narilmor. The king gave up his will to become one of her purified, these beings of light bound to her service. The city was a temple to light itself, filled with aurorans and magical radiance. Umaril made it his base when he returned in the Third Era. Abagarlas worshipped Molagbal. The city became so corrupted by Daedric influence that the earth itself rejected it. Dinar and other Aelid kings banded together to seal Abagarlas before it could spread its corruption. The city exists in a pocket dimension, accessible only through portals. Delodiel, the Hollow City, worshipped Meridia and called her Meridnunda. After being pulled into Cold Harbor, it became the staging ground for the mortal assault on Molagbal's realm. The city's devotion to light made it resistant to Cold Harbor's darkness, creating a safe haven in the plane of domination itself. Watasan was built on a rise overlooking the upper Niben. Its slaves were called the Cyronords. Pelennor freed them early in the rebellion. The ruins featured these spinning stones with Aelid runes that need to be aligned properly to unlock doors and passages. Vindasil, home of the Wailing Wheels. Nothing else specific is known about the city beyond its specialization in that particular form of art torture. The ruins are crawling with undead in the Third and Fourth Eras. Sursen, home of the Gut Gardens. Also limited information beyond their torture specialty. By the time of Oblivion, just another dangerous ruin. Seyatar, realm of Fire King Hadul. Known for the hallucinogenic torture and burning children for tiger sport, Pelennor killed Hadul on the granite steps. The ruins presumably still have those steps thousands of years later. Lindai had an underwater section showing Aelid engineering could work in aquatic environments. The ruins in Oblivion feature flooded chambers with magical air pockets, suggesting sophisticated understanding of spatial magic. Kulot was notable for being one of the smallest Aelid ruins, yet it had significant magical defenses, protected by shock barrier gates that required specific Welkin stones to bypass. Vilverin stood right outside the Imperial City, visible from the water. One of the first ruins many players explore in Oblivion, shows how close Aelid structures are to modern civilization. Vanakas, Moranda, Nornal, Miskarkant, Venyandavik, Keatatar, dozens of cities, each with their own history and character. Most of that history is lost. We have names, ruins, artifacts, but the stories of who lived there, what made each place unique, died with the Aelids. The Aelid language deserves deeper examination because it tells us how they thought. Aelidun evolved from Aldmeris, the ancient Elven language. It shares roots with other Mer languages like Dunmeris and Bosmeris, but the Aelids developed unique vocabulary and grammar patterns. Names often contained multiple elements that described attributes or achievements. Laluriaran Dinar breaks down as Lalur, likely related to leadership. Iaron, in Dark Times, Dinar King. His full name meant King in Dark Times, reflecting his status as the last. City names followed patterns too. Names ending in Sel, Tar, Karkant, Vik were common. The suffixes probably indicated city type or status. Abagarlas, Garlas Malatar, both feature Garlas, which might mean temple or sacred city. The language had complex verb conjugations based on the subject's relationship to starlight and the divine. A slave performing an action would use different conjugations than a free person. Magic users had their own verb forms. This linguistic hierarchy reinforced social structures. Eilidun had specific words for concepts that don't translate cleanly to Cyrodiilic. Malatu meant truth, but specifically truth found through forbidden or dangerous knowledge. Latia was light, but specifically divine or magical light, not mundane illumination. Garlus meant cavern or underground place, but carried connotations of hidden knowledge and mystery. Their numbering system was base 8, which makes sense given their obsession with that number. This would have made their mathematics and architecture fundamentally different from base 10 systems. Poetry and song were important in Aelid culture. The Song of Pelennor, written by Aelid scholars after the fall, shows they valued literary expression even about their own defeat. The Father of the Nibin, about Topal's explorations, was written as an epic poem. Music theory based on 8-note scales rather than Western 7-note scales would sound alien to modern ears. Instruments recovered from ruins include bone flutes, stringed instruments made from meteoric materials, and percussion instruments incorporating Welkin stone chimes. Let's examine the religious schism more carefully, because it's central to understanding the Aelid's self-destruction. The Barsabic Aelids, who kept the old ways, weren't pacifists. They still kept slaves, they still waged war, but they didn't torture for entertainment. They followed the Aldmeri tradition of seeing themselves as inheritors of divine purpose, caretakers of the world the Hydra had created. Their temples featured statues of Auriel, Magnus, Trinemak, and other traditional deities. They performed rituals aimed at honoring ancestors and maintaining the cosmic order. They believed in earning their place in Aetherius through righteous action and preservation of tradition. The Daedra worshipping Aelids rejected this entirely. They saw the Aedra as failures who'd been tricked by Lorkhan into giving up their divinity. The Daedra, who'd refused to participate in creation, were the smart ones. They kept their power. They offered tangible benefits to their followers. This wasn't just theology, it was practical. Worshipping Meridia could grant you Auroran warriors. Worshipping Molagbal could give you power over others and techniques for maintaining slavery. Worshipping Hermaeus Mora could reveal hidden knowledge. The Daedra delivered results. The schism created a situation where Aelid kingdoms fought each other as much as they fought outsiders. Religious wars between Barsabic and Narfinsel cities. Proxy conflicts where Daedric princes would back their followers against rivals. The Aelids were never unified enough to present a coherent defense when the rebellion came. This division made Alessia's victory possible. She specifically courted Barsabic kingdoms, offering them religious tolerance and continued autonomy in exchange for neutrality or active support. Without those alliances, the rebellion might have failed. The Daedric princes themselves had mixed reactions to the fall. Meridia continued supporting Umaril even after the empire collapsed, eventually bringing him back for revenge. Molagbal claimed Bisnensel for his realm, but other princes seemed indifferent. The Aelids were just one group of worshippers among many. Their fall didn't significantly impact the prince's power or plans. This highlights something important about Daedra worship. The relationship is transactional, not personal. The princes granted power in exchange for devotion, but they didn't actually care about their followers beyond that. When the Aelids fell, the princes moved on to other worshippers. Theories about the Aelids continue to evolve as new texts are discovered and new ruins are explored. Let's go through some of the major debates. The climate change theory suggests Cyrodiil's transformation from jungle to temperate forest was entirely due to the fall of Aelid magic. The jungle climate was artificially maintained by enchantments radiating from White Gold Tower. When the tower changed hands and the Aelids were gone, the magic failed over several centuries and the natural climate reasserted itself. Evidence for this includes references to Cyrodiil as jungle in texts from the early First Era, but descriptions of temperate forests by the late First Era. The change happened relatively quickly in geological terms, suggesting magical rather than natural causes. The counter-argument is that the climate change was a divine miracle performed by Talos in the Third Era, blessing Cyrodiil with better weather. This comes from sources claiming Talos reshaped the land through Kim, the metaphysical state of achieving godlike power while maintaining individual identity. But this contradicts earlier texts describing the climate change happening much sooner. The Dwemer connection theory proposes that the Aelids and Dwemer exchanged knowledge. Both civilizations existed simultaneously for thousands of years. Both achieved incredible magical and architectural feats. Some ruins show similar construction techniques, but there's no direct evidence they ever met or communicated. The Dwemer lived underground in Skyrim, Hammerfell, and Morrowind. The Aelids lived above ground in Cyrodiil. Their territories barely overlapped. Their philosophies were different. The Dwemer were materialists who rejected gods, while the Aelids were deeply religious. Still, some scholars think the similarities are too striking to be coincidence. The Birdman theory has many variations. What happened to the original inhabitants of the Heartlands? Were they killed? Enslaved into extinction? Did they flee? Some theories suggest the Birdmen were actually early Khajiit or Argonians, since both races have animalistic features. Others think they were a unique species that got wiped out. The most disturbing version suggests the Birdmen became the first subjects of flesh sculpture experimentation. The Aelids practiced on them, perfecting their techniques before later applying them to humans. This would explain why the Birdmen vanished completely and why the Aelids were already skilled at art torture when humans arrived. The Pelinal time traveler theory comes from careful reading of the Song of Pelinal, his armor from the future, his awareness that he was like when the dream no longer needs its dreamer, his admission that he was an enemy of all elves before he met Alessia, suggesting he came from a time when elves had already done terrible things. Some think Pelinal was sent back in time by the Divines specifically to defeat the Aelids, that he came from a future where the Aelids had won and enslaved all of humanity, so the gods intervened by sending a champion back to change history. This would explain his anachronistic equipment and his strange comments about his own existence. The Umaril divine heritage theory questions exactly what Umaril was. Half elf, half divine, but which divine? Some think his father was Magnus, explaining his connection to light and his association with Meridia. Others think he was a child of one of the Magnage, the spirits who fled with Magnus. This would make Umaril significantly more powerful than a normal half-breed. Divine blood from an original creator spirit would grant access to reality-shaping abilities. His immortality through Meridia might have been possible only because he already had divine essence. A mortal couldn't survive that process. The Kimil Adabal origin theory debates where the Amulet of Kings actually came from. Official imperial history says Akatosh gave it to Alessia, but older texts suggest it was Aelid made, created from a drop of Lorkhan's blood. If the Aelids created it, that means they bound themselves to Lorkhan, the god their Aldmer ancestors blamed for mortality. This gets really deep into metaphysics. Lorkhan represents change, mortality, limitation. The Aldmer hated him for tricking Daedra into creating Mundus. But what if the Aelids saw Lorkhan differently? What if they embraced mortality and limitation as the price for free will and the ability to shape their own destiny? That would explain why they broke from the Aldmer and why Lorkhan was one of their 10 ancestors. The memory stone theory suggests the white limestone used in Aelide construction wasn't just building material, it was a storage medium for memories and knowledge. The stones themselves contain the recorded experiences of the Aelids who built them. Modern mages can't access this information because they don't know the right techniques. If true, every Aelid ruin is essentially a vast library encoded in stone. Thousands of years of history, magical research, cultural knowledge, all sitting there waiting for someone to figure out how to read it. This would explain why the ruins still have that faint magical glow and why Daedra are drawn to them. The slavery as magical fuel theory is one of the darker academic proposals. Some scholars think the Aelids didn't torture slaves just for pleasure or religion. They were harvesting something. Fear, pain, suffering, these emotions generate magical energy in certain mystical traditions. Maybe the art torture was a magical practice disguised as entertainment. This would mean the entire slave system was a power source. the systematic suffering of thousands of people generating magical energy that powered the cities, the wells, the infrastructure. If this is true, when the slaves were freed and the torture stopped, the Aelids lost their primary energy source. The magic failed not just because they lost the war, but because they lost access to their fuel. There's no definitive proof for this theory, but it explains some oddities. Why was torture so widespread and systematic rather than just scattered cruelty? Why did certain cities specialize in specific techniques? Maybe different methods generated different types of magical energy, and cities were optimizing their production. The breakaway civilization theory proposes that not all Aelids were accounted for. Some communities might have fled to places nobody knows about. Pocket dimensions, isolated islands, underground cities. They could still exist in hiding, preserving their culture in secret. This seems unlikely given how thoroughly humans hunted them during the diaspora and pogrom. But Tamriel is huge, with unexplored regions. The Aelids were masters of spatial magic and alteration. If any group could hide an entire city in a pocket dimension or behind permanent illusions, they could. There are occasional rumors in the games of strange elves with unusual magic showing up in remote areas, then vanishing before anyone can confirm what they were. Could be Aelids. More likely, just rumors. But it keeps the possibility alive in people's imaginations. Let's talk about the Aelids' relationship with other cultures beyond just their slaves because they didn't exist in isolation. The Falmer, the snow elves of Skyrim, were dealing with their own crisis during the height of the Aelid Empire. Nordic expansion was pushing them out. Some Falmer might have contacted the Aelids seeking alliance or refuge. There's no record of this, but it would make sense. Both were elven civilizations facing human expansion. If the Aelids refused to help, that would be characteristic of their isolationism and focus on internal conflicts. Each kingdom was too busy competing with other Aelid kingdoms to care about distant cousins in Skyrim. This would have been a huge strategic error, since a unified elven response might have stopped human expansion entirely. The Chimer, in Morrowind, were contemporaries. Both groups left Somerset around the same time. Both embraced Daedra worship, though in different ways, but there's no evidence they ever communicated. Morrowind and Cyrodiil had no direct route between them. The Veloti Mountains and geography kept them separate. Interestingly, the Chimer successfully maintained their culture through the transformation into Dunmer. They kept their territory, their identity, their civilization. What did they do that the Aelids didn't? Several things. They were more unified under the Tribunal. They treated the Dunmer population less brutally, creating less internal resistance. They made smarter alliances. The Bosmer in Valenwood had complicated relations with the Aelids. Some Aelid kingdoms tried to conquer parts of Valenwood. Border skirmishes were common. But when the diaspora happened, the Bosmer took in refugees. This suggests the relationship wasn't purely antagonistic. Maybe certain Bosmer clans had peaceful relations with certain Aelid kingdoms. The taking in of refugees under the condition of the Green Pact was clever. It guaranteed the Aelids would integrate rather than conquer. By forcing them to abandon their traditional ways of shaping the land, the Bosmer ensured the refugees would become dependent on their hosts. Within generations, they'd be Bosmer. The Maormer, the sea elves of Piandonia, are rarely mentioned in connection with the Aelids, but they were active during the First Era, raiding coastal settlements. Did they ever raid Aelid cities along the Niben? The Aelids had some coastal presence. Sea-based attacks might have contributed to their vulnerability during the rebellion. The Khajiit of Elsewhere had minimal contact with the Aelids as far as we know. The Adataric refugees who fled there after being rejected from Black Marsh died on some expedition. Maybe they tried to conquer Khajiit territory and got destroyed. Maybe they died from disease or exposure. We don't know. The Red Guards wouldn't arrive in Tamriel until the end of the First Era, well after the Aelids were gone. But some theories suggest earlier human cultures in Hammerfell might have had contact with the Aelids. If so, no records survived. The Bretons are interesting because they're literally the result of human-elf mixing. The Direni elves ruled over human populations in High Rock, and interbreeding created the Breton race. When Aelid refugees joined the Direni, they contributed to this genetic mixing. Modern Bretons might have some Aelid ancestry. This means the Aelids didn't go completely extinct genetically. Their bloodline continues in the Bretons, mixed with Direni and human blood. It's diluted, changed beyond recognition, but it exists. Some Bretons might unknowingly carry genes from the same elves who perfected flesh sculpture. The Orcs, then called Orsimer, were outcasts during the Aelid period. After the transformation of Trinimac into Malakath, the Orcs were hunted by other elves. Did the Aelids participate in this persecution? Unknown. The Aelids included Trinimac in their 10 ancestors before his transformation, but we don't know their reaction to Malakath. The relationship between magic and cruelty in Aelid culture deserves examination because it seems contradictory. How could such an advanced civilization be so brutal? Magic in Elder Scrolls comes from Aetherius, the realm of pure possibility and magical energy. It's not inherently good or evil. It's a tool, a force of nature. The Aelids understood this better than most cultures. They approached magic scientifically, experimentally. This detached, analytical approach to magic might have extended to their treatment of people. If you view suffering as a phenomenon to study rather than a moral wrong, torture becomes research. You're investigating pain thresholds, testing magical enhancement of sensory experiences, documenting the limits of healing magic in reversing trauma. The flesh sculpture wasn't sadism from this perspective. It was artistic expression combined with scientific investigation of how far bodies could be altered. The gut gardens were studies in keeping organs functional outside their normal configuration. The wailing wheels tested sustained vocal trauma under magical conditions. This makes them worse, not better. Sadism at least implies emotional involvement. The Aelid approach was cold, systematic, documented. They kept records, they compared techniques. They refined their methods over generations. Industrial-scale cruelty packaged as advancement of knowledge. The Daedric influence encouraged this. Hermaeus Mora values knowledge above all else, without moral judgment about how it's obtained. Molag Bal wants domination for its own sake. Sanguine pursues pleasure without restraint. Following these, princes meant abandoning ethical limitations on what magic could be used for. But the Aelids made a choice to follow those specific princes. Other Daedra exist. Azura values wisdom and prophecy. Meridia opposes undead and loves life. Even among Daedra worshippers, you can choose which to follow. The Aelids chose the cruelest options. Well, some did. Not all Aelid kingdoms tortured slaves. The Barsabic kingdoms proved you could be Aelid without being monstrous. This makes the Daedra worshipping kingdoms even less forgivable. They knew better. They had examples of different choices. They chose cruelty anyway. The question of whether the Aelids were inherently evil or corrupted by circumstance remains debated. Nature versus nurture on a civilizational scale. Arguments for inherent evil point to the systematic nature of their cruelty. It wasn't individual Aelids being cruel. It was cultural, institutional, celebrated. Multiple generations of Aelids in multiple kingdoms all engaging in the same behaviors suggests something deeper than circumstantial corruption. Arguments for corruption point to the Barsabic Aelids as evidence that Aelid culture didn't necessitate cruelty. The same race, same language, same general culture, but without the torture. The difference was religion. Daedric influence corrupted them, not their nature as Aelids. The truth is probably somewhere in between. The Aelids had capacity for both greatness and monstrosity. Their achievements in magic and architecture show incredible creativity and intelligence. Their torture practices show depravity and cruelty. Same people, same civilization, both extremes. This mirrors humanity in the Elder Scrolls universe. Humans built great civilizations and also committed genocides. The Alessian order that destroyed the Aelids became oppressive themselves. The Aelids weren't unique in their capacity for evil. They were just particularly successful at industrializing it. Let's examine what happened to Aelid knowledge after the fall. because not everything was lost. Many Aelid texts survived. The Alessian scholars, even while persecuting living Aelids, preserved their writings. The Song of Pelinal was written by Aelid scholars documenting their own defeat. The Adab al-A described the slave experience. Countless magical treatises, historical records, and religious texts were kept in libraries. The University of Gwylym in Cyrodiil became a major repository of Aelid knowledge. Scholars there translated texts, studied ruins, attempted to recreate Aelid magic. This work continued for thousands of years. By the 3rd and 4th eras, academic understanding of the Aelids was pretty comprehensive. But there's a difference between understanding and being able to replicate. Modern scholars can read Aelid texts about creating Varla stones. They understand the theory, but they can't actually make one. The practical knowledge, the hands-on technique, died with the Aelids. This is true across many fields. Architectural knowledge of how to make the white limestone, musical traditions, specific spells and rituals. The theory survives in books, but the practice is gone. Some knowledge was deliberately destroyed. The Alessian order burned texts they deemed heretical or dangerous. Anything too closely associated with Daedra worship. Detailed descriptions of torture techniques. The order wanted to erase those aspects of Aelid culture completely. So we are left with a fragmented picture. Enough survives to understand what the Aelids were, what they did, how their civilization functioned, but not enough to rebuild it. And given what we know, that's probably for the best. Individual Aelid artifacts remain incredibly valuable. A working Welkin stone can fetch a fortune. Varla stones are priceless. Aelid weapons and armor, if they haven't decayed, are prized for their craftsmanship. Collectors pay huge sums for Aelid statuary and artwork. This creates a whole economy around Aelid ruins. Professional dungeon delvers make their living exploring old cities and selling what they find. The imperial government technically owns all Aelid ruins in Cyrodiil, but enforcement is impossible. There's too many ruins, too many treasure hunters, too much money involved. The Mages Guild during the Third Era regulated access to some ruins, particularly dangerous ones or those with important historical value. But most ruins were open to anyone brave or foolish enough to explore them. The dangers are real. Residual magical wards trigger when disturbed, trapped corridors, unstable structures that collapse, and the creatures, Daedra drawn to magical energy. Undead raised by necromancers, bandits who kill competing treasure hunters. Exploring Aelid ruins is one of the most dangerous professions in Tamriel. Now, we should discuss what the Aelids represent in Elder Scrolls lore beyond just their historical existence. They're a cautionary tale about power without restraint. The Aelids had everything: magical knowledge, architectural genius, territorial control, resources, but they used their power for cruelty, and it destroyed them. The slaves they tortured rose up and brought down the entire civilization. They represent the danger of religious extremism. The schism between Aedra and Daedra worship tore the empire apart. The Daedric kingdoms became so obsessed with pleasing their princes that they lost sight of basic morality. Religious devotion without ethical limits leads to atrocity. They demonstrate that technological advancement doesn't equal moral progress. The Aelids were more magically advanced than any civilization before or since, but being good at magic didn't make them good people. Scientific progress and moral progress are separate things. They show how divisions within an empire invite outside conquest. If the Aelids had been unified, the rebellion might have failed, but they were too busy fighting each other to mount an effective defense. Internal conflict created the opportunity for external defeat. They proved that you can't build lasting civilization on suffering. The Aelid Empire lasted maybe 3,000 years from founding to fall. Impressive, but it collapsed because its foundation was slavery. When the slaves freed themselves, everything built on that foundation came down. They're a warning about cultural memory and historical trauma. Humans never forgot what the Aelids did. For thousands of years, the stories persisted, the hatred endured. This created lasting distrust between humans and elves, that shaped Tamriel's entire history. From a meta perspective, the Aelids let Bethesda explore dark themes in Elder Scrolls lore without making any playable race irredeemably evil. The Aelids did horrible things, but they're extinct. Players don't have to grapple with whether to sympathize with active torturers because there are no living Aelids. This is clever writing. The historical depth and world building benefit from having a genuinely evil civilization in the backstory. But by making them extinct, the games avoid the problematic implications of letting players interact with unrepentant slavers and torturers. The ruins serve multiple gameplay functions: dungeons to explore, loot to find, environmental storytelling showing the fall of an ancient empire. They're atmospheric, mysterious, dangerous, perfect for an RPG setting. The Aelids also provide context for human civilizations in Cyrodiil. The Empire exists because the Aelids fell. White Gold Tower symbolizes human triumph over elven cruelty. The Amulet of Kings represents stolen Aelid power repurposed for human rule. Every human emperor wearing it is a reminder that humans overcame enslavement. Let's address some common misconceptions about the Aelids, because fan discussions often get things wrong. Misconception 1. All Aelids were evil. Not true. The Barsabic Aelids who worshipped the Aedra didn't engage in art torture. They treated their subjects more humanely. They even allied with Alessia against their Daedra-worshipping cousins. The generalization all Aelids were evil erases this nuance. Misconception 2. The Aelids were wiped out in the rebellion. Actually, the immediate aftermath of the rebellion saw many Aelid kingdoms survive as vassals. The real extermination came later during the Alessian pogrom. The civilization didn't fall all at once. It was a gradual decline over 200 years from the rebellion to the final diaspora. Misconception 3. Pelinal was human. The Song of Pelinal is pretty clear he was something else, an Ada, a spirit, some kind of divine construct. He had a crystal for a heart. His hand was made of light. His armor came from the future. He wasn't a mortal human hero. He was something stranger and more terrible. Misconception 4. The Aelids invented slavery. Slavery existed in Tamriel before them and continued after. The Aelids didn't invent the institution. What made them unique was combining slavery with systematic torture as cultural practice. That's the distinction. Misconception 5. Modern elves in the games are descended from Aelids. The Altmer are descended from Aldmer, who stayed in Somerset, not the Aelids who left. The Bosmer absorbed some Aelid refugees, but are primarily descended from earlier Aldmeri settlers in Valenwood. The Dunmer come from the Chimer, who went to Morrowind. The only group with likely Aelid ancestry is the Bretons, who are already mixed human-elf hybrids. Misconception 6. The White Gold Tower is a tower like Red Mountain is a tower. They're both towers in the metaphysical sense, reality anchors, but they function differently. White Gold was deliberately built to be a tower. Red Mountain became a tower through different circumstances. The Aelids understood tower mechanics and engineered White Gold specifically for that purpose. Misconception 7. Aelid runes are all the same. The runes you explore in Oblivion have similar visual styles because of asset reuse for game development purposes. Lore-wise, each city was unique with its own architecture, layout, and characteristics. Garlas Malatar looked different from Abagarlas, which looked different from Nenalata. Misconception 8. The Aelids worshipped all Daedric princes equally. Different kingdoms favored different princes. Meridia was popular in many cities. Molag Bal had dedicated followers. But not every prince had equal representation. Some princes like Clavicus, Vile, or Namira barely appear in Aelid worship records. Misconception 9. Alessia's rebellion was primarily Nordic. The Nords helped, yes. Pelinal's legend drew them in. But the core of the rebellion was enslaved Nedes, rising up with support from Barsabic Aelid kingdoms. The Nords were allies, not the primary force. Misconception 10. The Amulet of Kings gave emperors dragon blood. The amulet was the symbol of legitimate rule and helped light the dragonfires to maintain the barrier against oblivion. Dragon blood came from Alessia's pact with Akatosh, creating a draconic bloodline. The amulet and dragon blood are related but distinct concepts. Now let's talk about player experiences with Eylead content across the games, because how players interact with this lore matters. In Oblivion, Eylead ruins are everywhere. They are some of the most common dungeon types. Early in the game, you are sent to Vilverin right outside the Imperial City. The ruins become familiar. White stone corridors, Welkin stones glowing blue, undead or bandits lurking. For many players, the ruins are just dungeons, places to loot. The historical and cultural significance gets lost in the gameplay loop of fighting enemies and grabbing treasures. The environmental storytelling is there, the architecture, the statues, the magical items, but you have to actively look for it. The Knights of the Nine expansion changed this. Fighting Umaril, exploring Garlas Malatar, that made the Eyleads feel real and dangerous again, rather than just ancient history. Here was an actual Eylead, returned and threatening. It connected the ruins to living consequences. In Elder Scrolls Online, set in the Second Era, the Eyleads are more recent history. King Dinar is a major character. The Hollow City storyline makes the Eyleads sympathetic. Here's their last king, trapped and suffering, helping to save the world. ESO humanized them in ways Oblivion didn't. This creates some cognitive dissonance. You read about flesh sculptures and burning children, then you meet Dinar and he's heroic and noble. The game forces you to reconcile that the Eyleads were complex. Some were monsters, some weren't. Even within one individual, you could have both. Skyrim had minimal Eylead content since it takes place in Nordic territory. The Eyleads never had strong presence there, but the Snow Elf Falmer storyline parallels the Eylead fall. Elves who were destroyed by humans, though the Falmer were victims while the Eyleads were aggressors. The extended lore from books, developer discussions, and out-of-game texts adds layers that casual players never see. The full extent of Eylead brutality is mostly in texts like the Adabal-A or scholarly volumes. The games show you ruins and occasional NPCs but don't hit you over the head with the horror. This creates a spectrum of player understanding. Some players think Eyleads were just generic ancient elves. Others have read deeply and understand the full evil of what they represented. The lore rewards investigation but doesn't require it. From a game design perspective, this is smart. Players who want to engage deeply with lore can find incredibly dark, complex history. Players who just want to explore dungeons and fight monsters can do that without confronting uncomfortable questions about genocide and torture. But it also means the Eyleads serve different purposes for different players. For lore enthusiasts, they're a fascinating study in how civilizations fall and why cruelty leads to destruction. For casual players, they're just the ancient elves whose ruins provide gameplay content. The moral questions the Eyleads raise are worth examining because they don't have simple answers. Was the Alessian pogrom justified? The Eyleads who helped the rebellion, the ones who didn't torture slaves, they got hunted down too. Children of Eyleads who never harmed anyone were killed for their ancestry. That's textbook genocide. But from a human perspective, every living Eylead represented the civilization that had tortured their grandparents. Even the good Eyleads had benefited from slavery. They'd lived in cities built by slave labor, eaten food grown by slaves, worn clothes made by slaves. Their hands might not have held the torture implements, but they'd been complicit. Can you argue collective punishment is ever justified? The Alessian Order thought so. They saw the entire Eylead race as guilty. And given what we know about flesh sculptures and gut gardens, it's hard to say they were completely wrong, even if their methods were extreme. The Barsabic Eyleads in Black Marsh enslaved Argonians for flesh sculpture, using their skin for its color and texture. So even the good Eyleads weren't innocent. They just targeted different victims. Maybe the question isn't whether the Eyleads deserve destruction, but whether humans became monsters themselves in destroying them. The Alessian Order grew increasingly tyrannical. They burned books, persecuted anyone with elven ancestry, launched wars of religious conquest, they became oppressors in their own right. The cycle of violence perpetuated itself. Aelid cruelty created human hatred. Human hatred created the pogrom. The pogrom created the Alessian Order's extremism. That extremism eventually led to civil war and the Order's own downfall. Nobody came out morally clean. What about the knowledge lost? The Aelids understood magic and architecture in ways nobody since has matched. By exterminating them, humanity might have set back magical progress by centuries or millennia. Was revenge worth losing that knowledge? From a utilitarian perspective, maybe the torture techniques deserved to be lost. Maybe some knowledge is too dangerous or was gained too unethically to preserve. But the Aelids knew more than just how to torture people. They knew how to harness starlight, create perpetual magical engines, build structures that would last forever. That's useful knowledge. The ethical questions get even harder when you consider individual Aelids. Not every Aelid kingdom tortured slaves. Not every Aelid participated in cruelty. Some Aelids were children who'd never harmed anyone. Some were scholars who just wanted to study magic. Some were farmers or craftsmen who happened to be born into an evil empire. Do children deserve to be punished for their parents' crimes? Does being part of an evil civilization make you personally evil, even if you never personally did evil things? These are questions the games don't answer, because there's no good answer. The Aelids represent an uncomfortable truth about civilizations and collective guilt. How do you judge an entire culture? At what point does cultural practice become cultural identity, become collective responsibility? And from a modern perspective, what can we learn from the Aelids about our own civilizations? Every advanced society has dark aspects, systemic injustices, powerful interests built on exploitation. The Aelids are an extreme case, but they're a warning about what happens when power goes unchecked and cruelty becomes normalized. Let's talk about specific magical techniques the Aelids used that have been lost or remain mysterious. The binding of Daedra to physical locations without summoning circles was an Aelid specialty. Modern conjuration requires circles, rituals, specific conditions. The Aelids could apparently just anchor Daedra to places using Welkin stone magic. How exactly they did this is unknown. The techniques died with them. The perpetual motion enchantments on Aelid wells are beyond modern understanding. These wells have been functioning for thousands of years without any maintenance. No power source is visible. They just work forever. Current enchanting theory says all enchantments eventually decay. The wells prove that's wrong, but nobody knows how the Aelids overcame enchantment decay. Weather manipulation and climate control at the scale the Aelids supposedly achieved would require reality-altering magic beyond anything modern mages can do. The theory about Cyrodiil's jungle climate being artificially maintained implies they could permanently alter weather patterns across an entire region. That's tower-level magic, comparable to what the Psijic Order or Tribunal might manage at their peaks. The flesh sculpture techniques were probably lost deliberately. Any text describing how to magically reshape living bodies while keeping them alive got burned during the Alessian purges. Modern illusion magic can manipulate perceptions and thoughts. Modern restoration can heal and transform. But combining them to literally reshape someone's physical form without killing them, that knowledge is gone, and probably should stay gone. The creation of great Welkin stones remains impossible to replicate. These massive crystals powered entire cities. They required huge amounts of meteoric glass, which is already extremely rare, plus magical techniques nobody understands anymore. Finding a working Great Welkin stone in a ruin is incredibly lucky because they're essentially lost artifacts of impossible craftsmanship. The architectural techniques for creating the white limestone are mysterious. Modern analysis shows the stone is limestone, but limestone doesn't normally have those magical properties or that durability. The Aelids did something to it during creation or treatment. Maybe they infused it with ethereal energy. Maybe they altered it at a molecular level with alteration magic. Nobody knows. The 8-note musical scales and their magical applications are partially lost. Some Aelid instruments survive in ruins. Scholars can examine them, figure out their tuning. But how the Ailids used music in magical rituals, what effects they could produce, the specific compositions and techniques, mostly gone. Music magic exists in the Elder Scrolls, but the Aelid approach to it is lost. The starlight harvesting process for Aelid wells is completely unknown. How do you capture starlight? How do you store it? How do you convert it to usable magical energy? The wells do it automatically, but there's no manual, no documentation. Modern mages can use the wells but have no idea how to make one. The creation of Varla stones and Welkin stones from meteoric glass is theorized but not understood. You need meteoric glass, obviously. You need to enchant it somehow. But the specific rituals, the magical formulas, the techniques for making the glass receptive to enchantment, all lost. Studying existing stones doesn't help because attempting to analyze them destroys them. Some scholars think the knowledge was encoded in the white limestone itself, according to the memory stone theory. If true, we're walking past vast libraries of magical knowledge embedded in ruined walls, unable to access it. Future scholars might crack the code, but for now, it's locked away. These lost techniques represent an enormous gap in magical knowledge. If we could recover even one of them, say the perpetual enchantment method, it would revolutionize magic. But the knowledge died with the Aelids, and digging through ruins for thousands of years hasn't recovered it. This raises a question. Did the Aelids deliberately hide or protect their most important knowledge? Did they have some kind of dead man's switch that destroyed certain texts or techniques if their civilization fell? Were there secret libraries that nobody's found yet? Or did the knowledge simply die naturally? The people who knew how to make Varla stones were killed in the rebellion or diaspora. The techniques weren't written down or the texts were burned. The knowledge fragmented, scattered, lost. Sometimes important things just disappear through accident and chaos. Either way, the modern world is poorer for the loss. Morally, the Aelids deserved their fate, but intellectually, their destruction cost Tamriel immense knowledge. That tension, deserving destruction while representing irreplaceable achievement, is part of what makes them fascinating. Let's discuss what might have happened if the Aelids had won, if the rebellion failed. This is speculative but worth examining. If Pelinal had been defeated early, if Alesia had been captured and executed, the rebellion would have collapsed. The Barsabic Aelids, who allied with her, would have been destroyed by the Daedric kingdoms. The Nedes would have remained enslaved, and the worst practices would have continued. But empires built on slavery have a limited lifespan. The tension would have kept building. Eventually, another rebellion would have occurred. Maybe in another 100 years. Maybe another 1,000. But slavery systems are unstable. The enslaved population always outnumbers the slavers eventually. They find weapons, they find leaders, they revolt. The Aelid Empire might have ended up like Rome, gradually transforming from republic to empire to fragmented successor states, eventually collapsing under its own weight and external pressures. Or the Daedric influence might have become so strong that Tamriel itself was threatened. If the Daedra-worshipping Aelids kept gaining power, kept making pacts with their princes, eventually they might have opened Tamriel to full Daedric invasion. Molag Bal in the Second Era tried the Planimeld. Mehrunes Dagon in the Third Era tried the Oblivion Crisis. An Aelid-dominated Tamriel might have made these invasions possible centuries earlier. Would the Divines have intervened? Probably. The Aedra helped Alesia. If the Aelids had won that time, the gods would have found another way. The Daedra gaining complete control of Tamriel would have disrupted the cosmic balance. The Aedra wouldn't have allowed it. But in a timeline where the Aelids won, human civilization might never have developed. No Alessian Empire, no Riemann dynasty, no Septim Empire. Cyrodiil would have remained the Aelid heartland. White Gold Tower would still be the temple of the ancestors. The entire history of Tamriel would be unrecognizably different. Would the Aelids have eventually reformed, ended slavery on their own? Possible, but unlikely. The institution was too profitable, too deeply embedded in their economy and culture. Reform would have required either external pressure they didn't face or internal moral revolution that showed no signs of happening. The Bersabic Aelids might have eventually defeated the Daedric kingdoms in the civil war if it had continued. If they'd won, the resulting Aedra-worshipping empire might have been less brutal. But this seems unlikely given how decisively the scouring of Wendelbeck ended in the Daedric kingdom's favor. Ultimately, the Aelid victory scenario leads to either eventual collapse anyway, or a nightmare timeline where Daedric influence grows until Tamriel itself is corrupted beyond saving. Their defeat, while brutal, was probably necessary for Tamriel's continued existence. Now, we should address the legacy the Aelids left in specific locations, because different parts of Cyrodiil have different Aelid influences. The Imperial City and White Gold Tower are the most obvious. The entire city is built on and around Aelid foundations. The 8 islands of the original purchase, the tower dominating the skyline. Even after thousands of years of human occupation, the Aelid presence is inescapable. Walking through the Imperial City, you're walking on Aelid streets. The sewers below are repurposed Aelid waterworks. The districts are built atop Aelid ruins. The Temple District sits where Aelid temples once stood. It's a palimpsest city, layers of human civilization written over Aelid foundations. The Naiban Valley is dotted with Aelid wells. More wells exist there than anywhere else in Cyrodiil. The concentration suggests this was the heartland of their civilization, the most densely populated and developed region. Every few miles, another well. Ancient irrigation systems, ruins of cities and settlements. The forests around the Naiban grew over Aelid farmland. If you dig down, you find Aelid agricultural terraces, sophisticated farming systems designed to maximize the fertile valley soil. They understood crop rotation, irrigation, soil enrichment, all of it worked by slave labor, but technically sophisticated. The area around Cheydinhal has particularly dense Aelid presence, multiple ruins within walking distance of the city. Cheydinhal itself is built near several old Aelid sites. The name Cheydinhal might be derived from Aelidun, though the exact etymology is debated. Bravil sits in an area of significant Aelid activity. The city's poverty and crime in the 3rd and 4th eras is ironic given how prosperous the region was under the Aelids. The same land that supported grand cities now hosts a struggling human settlement. Some attribute this to residual curses. More likely, it's just bad governance and economic factors. Skingrad's wine industry might have Aelid origins. Evidence suggests the Aelids cultivated grapes in the area. The climate and soil are perfect for it. When humans took over, they continued the tradition. Modern Skingrad wine could be using techniques that trace back thousands of years. Coral's location was strategic for the Aelids, control of the northern approaches to the heartland. Several ruins exist in the area. The Colovian Highlands had Aelid presence, though less dense than the Naiban Valley. The highlands were borderlands, less central to their civilization. Anvil and the Gold Coast had minimal Aelid influence, too far west, too close to what would become Hammerfell. The Aelids focused their development on the interior, on the Naiban Basin. Coastal areas were periphery. Leyawiin in the south shows Aelid influence mixing with the transition to Black Marsh. Some of the Barsabic refugees who fled to Argonia came through this area. Ruins near Leyawiin show architecture transitioning between Aelid and Argonian styles. Outside Cyrodiil, Aelid ruins exist in northern Black Marsh where the Barsabic refugees settled. These settlements were built after the scouring of Wendelbeck, so they're newer Aelid construction, only about 2,000 years old instead of 3,000 plus. The architecture shows some adaptation to the swamp environment. Valenwood has Aelid ruins scattered throughout. These are from the Diaspora period, maybe 1800 to 2000 years old. The construction had to adapt to the Green Pact restrictions. No cutting trees, so they built around existing forest. The ruins are overgrown now, integrated into the forest itself. High Rock's Aelid presence is mostly gone. Biznancel got pulled into Cold Harbor. Other settlements were absorbed into Direni territories and lost their distinct identity. But archaeological evidence suggests Aelid refugees had significant impact on High Rock's magical traditions. The fact that you can still see Aelid influence everywhere in Cyrodiil, thousands of years after they vanished, shows how thoroughly they dominated the landscape. They literally shaped the land. Human civilization in Cyrodiil exists in the shadow of what they built. Let's examine the psychological and cultural trauma the Aelids inflicted and how it echoed through history. The Nedic slaves who were freed carried memories of torture. They told their children what had been done to them. Those children told their children. The oral tradition of suffering passed down through generations. Even 1,000 years later, humans in Cyrodiil grew up hearing stories about the Wailing Wheels and God Gardens. This created a cultural fear of elves that persisted long after the Aelids were extinct. When humans in Cyrodiil saw any elf, even friendly Bosmer or neutral Altmer, part of them remembered the stories. Xenophobia has many sources, but Aelid brutality gave it historical justification. The Alessian Order weaponized this trauma. They used stories of Aelid cruelty to justify their persecution of all elves, even those who'd never harmed anyone. They rewrote history to emphasize human suffering and elven evil. This propaganda was effective because it had roots in truth. By the Third Era, over 2,000 years after the Aelids fell, the trauma had faded but not disappeared. Most humans in Cyrodiil didn't actively hate elves, but the stories were still told. Children still learned about the evil elves who'd ruled before humans freed themselves. Cultural memory has long reach. The impact on human-elf relations across all of Tamriel can be overstated. The Aelids set a precedent. They showed what elves could do with unchecked power. Every subsequent conflict between humans and elves, every war and persecution, happened in the context of that historical example. When the Thalmor rose in the Fourth Era and started pushing Altmer supremacy, humans had ready-made fears to tap into. Remember what happened when elves ruled humans before. Remember the Aelids. Never mind that the Altmer were completely different from the Aelids. The historical trauma made the comparison easy. This is one of the Aelids' most lasting legacies. Not their magic or architecture, but the psychological scar they left on human civilization. They poisoned human-elf relations for millennia through their cruelty. The irony is that other elven civilizations suffered for what the Aelids did. The Bosmer, who took in refugees and absorbed them peacefully, still faced human suspicion. The Dunmer in Morrowind, who had their own complex culture with nothing to do with the Aelids, got painted with the same brush. The sins of the Aelids became sins attributed to all elves. This collective blame is unjust, but psychologically understandable. Humans who'd been enslaved and tortured didn't make fine distinctions between different elven cultures. Elves had done this to them. All elves became potential threats. Even positive human-elf interactions happened against this background. The Alessian synthesis of human and elven religion was remarkable, but it existed because humans needed to reconcile their hatred of Aelids with their adoption of Aelid gods. The mental gymnastics required created theological confusion that led to the Alessian Order's extremism. The trauma also manifested in human pride about the rebellion. Alessia became a saint. Pelinal became a legendary hero despite being a psychotic murderer. The rebellion became the foundational myth of human civilization in Cyrodiil. We overthrew the cruel elves and built our own empire. National identity built on trauma and vengeance. This pattern repeats in history. Oppressed people free themselves, then build their identity around that freedom, sometimes becoming oppressors themselves in the process. The Alessian Empire started as freed slaves creating a better world. It ended as religious fanatics persecuting anyone who disagreed with them. Trauma creates cycles. Breaking those cycles requires confronting the trauma honestly, acknowledging what happened without using it to justify new cruelty. By the Third Era, Cyrodiil had mostly managed this. The empire was multicultural, accepting elves and other races. The old hatreds had faded, but they never disappeared completely. Now let's discuss some of the stranger theories and fringe ideas about the Aelids, because the lore community has developed some wild speculation. The Amaranth theory suggests the Aelids were attempting to achieve Amaranth, a a state beyond Kim where you become a new dreamer and create your own reality separate from the current one. Their torture practices weren't just cruelty, but attempts to understand the nature of suffering in order to transcend it. This theory is mostly unsupported, but interesting metaphysically. The time loop theory proposes that Pelinal, being from the future, means the Alessian rebellion was predestined. The Aelids were always going to fall because history had already happened from a future perspective. Their cruelty guaranteed their destruction through temporal mechanics. This gets into weird time travel philosophy that Elder Scrolls lore sometimes embraces. The Lorkhan avatar theory suggests many Aelids were aspects of Lorkhan trying to prevent his return or influence. The inclusion of Lorkhan in the 10 ancestors, despite him being the enemy god, to most elves hints at something deeper. Maybe worshipping Lorkhan while being elves created cognitive dissonance that drove them to extremes. The Numidium connection theory points out that the Dwemer built Numidium to refute the gods, and the Aelids built White Gold Tower to channel divine power, two opposite approaches to dealing with divinity. Some think the Aelids and Dwemer were aware of each other and developed their metaphysical projects in competition. The Dragon Break theory suggests the Aelide period might have involved a dragon break, a temporal anomaly where time becomes non-linear. This would explain some contradictions in the historical record. Different Aelid kingdoms existing in different timelines simultaneously. When the break ended, one timeline became real and the others faded. The prisoner mythology theory notes that Pelinal shares characteristics with the prisoner, the archetypal hero in Elder Scrolls lore, being outside normal time, having undefined origins, being a tool of prophecy. Maybe Pelinal was an early prisoner, or the first one, setting the pattern all later heroes would follow. The Shezarene collective theory proposes multiple Shezarenes existed among the rebels. Pelinal was one. Maybe Alessia was another. Maybe Morihaus. Multiple avatars of Lorkhan working together to overthrow the elves who'd rejected him. This makes the rebellion a divine war fought through mortal proxies. The Hist involvement theory suggests the Hist, the sentient trees of Blackmarsh, manipulated events. The Barsabic Aelids who fled to Blackmarsh brought flesh sculpture there, threatening the Argonians. Maybe the Hist encouraged the original rebellion to prevent Aelite expansion into the marsh. The Sithis worship theory notes that Pelinal emerged like a Podomaic carried by Sithis. Sithis represents change and void. Maybe the Aelids' biggest sin wasn't cruelty, but stagnation. They'd created a stable civilization which opposed the force of change. Sithis sent Pelinal to destroy that stability and restore change to Tamriel. The Moth Priest Vision theory suggests our understanding of Aelid history comes from Elder Scrolls read by Moth Priests, which means it's prophecy as much as history. The events might not have happened exactly as recorded. The scrolls show truth, but not necessarily literal truth. The Aelids might be worse or better than records suggest. These theories range from plausible to absurd. Elder Scrolls lore is weird enough that even crazy theories can't be completely dismissed. The games deliberately leave things ambiguous, inviting speculation. What's interesting is how these theories try to find deeper meaning in the Aelids beyond they were evil and got destroyed. People want cosmic significance, metaphysical explanations, something more than just a civilization that happened to be brutal and paid for it. Maybe that's the point. Sometimes evil is just evil. Sometimes cruelty happens because people choose cruelty. The Aelids don't need to be part of some grand cosmic plan. They can just be elves who had power and used it to hurt people until someone stopped them. But the speculation continues because the Aelids are gone and can't contradict interpretation. They're whatever the lore community needs them to be. Metaphysical villains, cautionary tales, tragic figures, misunderstood researchers. All interpretations exist simultaneously in fan discussion. Let's talk about what the future might hold for Aelid lore in potential Elder Scrolls games. Elder Scrolls 6 will presumably be set in either Hammerfell or High Rock, or both. If High Rock is included, we might see more about the Aelid Derenni connection, maybe ruins of settlements the refugees built. maybe Breton characters with significant Allied ancestry. The game could explore how Allied refugees integrated into Direni society. Or we might see nothing about them. The Aelids had minimal presence in Western Tamriel. A High Rock game could completely ignore them and focus on Breton and Direni history instead. If a future game ever revisited Cyrodiil, it would have to address the Aelids. You can't set a game there without dealing with ruins and legacy. Maybe time has buried more ruins. Maybe earthquakes have revealed lost cities. Maybe someone's discovered how to read the memory stones and unlocked Aelid knowledge. A game set in Black Marsh could explore the Barsabic settlements and their interaction with Argonians, showing how even the good Aelids perpetuated slavery and flesh sculpture, making the moral picture more complex. A game set in Valenwood could show the abandoned Aelid settlements integrated into the forest. Maybe some descendants with mixed Bosmer Aelid heritage, exploring how the culture faded and was absorbed. Or Bethesda might decide the Aelids have been thoroughly explored already. They had their spotlight in Oblivion. ESO gave them more depth with Diner and the Hollow City. Maybe future games will focus on other parts of the lore instead. The risk with revisiting the Aelids is making them less interesting through overexposure. Part of what makes them compelling is their absence. They're mysterious, legendary, gone. Showing too much could diminish them. But there are still untold stories. What happened during the 200 years between the rebellion and the diaspora? What were the last days of the final Aelid kingdoms like? How did the refugees feel abandoning their homeland? These human stories exist in the margins of the lore. Individual Aelids beyond kings and villains could be interesting. An Aelid scholar who opposed slavery but couldn't stop it. An Aelid child during the pogrom who did nothing wrong but got hunted anyway. These perspectives would complicate the simple Aelids evil, humans good narrative. But Bethesda seems content leaving the Aelids as historical antagonists. They serve their purpose in the backstory. They explain why White Gold Tower exists and why human civilization dominates Cyrodiil. They provide dungeon content through ruins. Making them more sympathetic or complex might undermine those functions. We're probably not getting an Aelid character creator option. We're probably not getting an Aelid faction to join. They're staying dead, staying in the past, staying as the civilization that fell because it was too cruel to survive. And honestly, that's fine. Not every extinct civilization needs to be redeemed or made playable. The Aelids work as antagonists in history. Their role is to be the evil empire that fell, the cautionary tale, the reminder that power without ethics leads to destruction. So why are the Aelids the most evil race in Elder Scrolls history? Let me bring this all together. The Dwemer enslaved the Falmer and poisoned them into blind cave creatures. That's horrible. But the Dwemer needed servants and soldiers for their projects. It was pragmatic evil. Evil with a purpose beyond the suffering itself. The Slodes unleashed the Thrasin plague that killed half of Tamriel. Genocidal on a massive scale. But it was part of their invasion strategy. Again, evil with strategic purpose. They wanted to conquer, and the plague was their weapon. The Aelids enslaved the Nedes and tortured them systematically for entertainment and religious devotion. They called it art. They specialized in it. Different cities developed different torture techniques and celebrated them culturally. They set children on fire to light hunts. They arranged living organs into gardens. They created wheels that made people wail. This wasn't pragmatic. This wasn't strategic. This was cruelty elevated to cultural institution. They built their entire civilization on a foundation of suffering. Not just slavery, which is evil enough, but torture as aesthetic expression. Pain as religious offering. Agony as art. They had the magical knowledge to do incredible things. They preserved Dawn-era magic. They built towers that still stand thousands of years later. They created wells that still function. They understood starlight and ethereal mechanics better than anyone before or since. And they used all that genius, all that power, all that knowledge to perfect suffering. The worst part is they knew better. The Barsabic Aelids proved you could be Aelid without being monstrous. You could have the same culture, same language, same magic without the torture. The cruelty was a choice. The Daedra-worshipping kingdoms chose to follow the princes of domination and debauchery. They chose to make art from suffering. They looked at Molag Bal, whose entire sphere is enslaving and violating others, and decided he was worth worshipping. They looked at Sanguine, who embodies hedonism without restraint, and let him guide their practices. They made conscious decisions to embrace the cruelest aspects of existence. When Pelinal Whitestrake cut them down, when Alessia's rebellion tore through their cities, when the Alessian Order drove survivors into exile and extinction, was it justice, revenge, genocide? All three probably. But looking at the Wailing Wheels and God Gardens and burning children, looking at systematic torture as cultural practice, it's hard to argue the Aelids didn't bring it on themselves. They built their empire on suffering. When that empire fell, they experienced the suffering they'd inflicted. The slaves they'd tortured rose up and destroyed them. The civilization built on cruelty got torn down by its victims. It took a few thousand years for them to fully vanish. The vassal kingdoms lasted a while. The refugees scattered and integrated. The last king died in Cold Harbor. The last champion was destroyed in the Colored Rooms. But eventually, completely, the Aelids ceased to exist. Nothing left but white stone ruins, glowing crystals, and stories that still make people shudder thousands of years later. The Hidden Ones. That's what Aelid means. They hid themselves right out of existence. The Dwemer vanished mysteriously, but they might still exist somewhere. The Slodes are still on their island. The Falmer survived as twisted shadows, but the Aelids, they're gone. Extinct, erased, their civilization, their culture, their people, all dead. They were the Heartland High Elves, the first empire of Tamriel, the builders of White Gold Tower, masters of starlight magic. They achieved wonders, they created marvels, they preserved ancient knowledge, and they were monsters. They made evil into art, they made it their culture, they made it who they were. So yeah, that's the Aelids, the most evil race in Elder Scrolls history. Not because they conquered the most territory or killed the most people, but because they made evil beautiful. They celebrated it, they perfected it, they built an entire civilization around it. And now, they're gone. Can't say anyone misses them.